WICR.
Alright folks, welcome back to our second segment of the day of The Rock is On. We just talked about the Raiders moving from Oakland to Las Vegas, and like I said, it's a sad day in Oakland. It's a sad day for Raider Nation in Oakland, for the people of the community who live in Oakland. You know, their hearts are just ripped out of their chest, and I just wish them the best of luck, because being a Jet fan, I can imagine if my team moved from New York. I don't even know if that were to happen, God forbid. I wouldn't know I don't know what I would do. I would say helpless and maybe undecided, unsure what to do. But we go from talking about that to the Elite Eight, and I have to tell you, some of these games, they were a bit of a shocker in a way. But obviously, you have the best game of the weekend, which was North Carolina and Kentucky, though. But we're going to preview it. We're going to get to that. We'll save that for last because it's the best for last. We'll start off with the number one seeded Gonzaga Bulldogs, who defeated Xavier 83-59. Gonzaga is going to be playing in their first ever Final Four. Should be interesting to see how that unfolds. And then you had the number 3 seeded Oregon Ducks defeated the number 1 seeded Kansas Jayhawks. You know, Tyler Dorsey for Oregon went off, had 27 points, was crashing the boards, and he had an MVP performance in the Elite Eight. And what stood out to me watching that game on Saturday was Oregon's defense was just so sensational and was just phenomenal. Because going into the game, Kansas as a team was averaging 96 points. And they were running up the scoreboard, and they were obliterating their opponents. Just wiping them off the floor, wiping them off the court, because those teams couldn't hang or couldn't play with them. And then you go into the Elite Eight, Oregon holds them to 60 points, and and you throw in the fact that that game took place in Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas is not that far from Kansas City, folks, geographically. You know, it felt like the Ducks were in enemy territory, and it was like a road game for the most part. But the Ducks prevailed defensively and shocked the Jayhawk fans in Kansas City. You know, and this is they played in the Final Four back in 1939, but you know what? That was different back. The way the tournament was back then, it was a completely different format. It wasn't as it is now. So this is pretty much the Ducks' first Final Four, if you think about it. And then another team, this is kind of a shock as well, was the 7th seeded South Carolina Gamecocks defeated the Florida Gators 77-70. And you know what? South Carolina, I have to say, so far they've been a pretty surprised team, to say the least, because they're usually more of a football school, but you throw in the fact that this is the school's first Final Four appearance, and they're a 7th seed, and then just the journey, you know, just to get to the Final Four, what teams they had to beat just to come here, or just to be at this point. You know, they had to go through the 2-seeded Duke, who was a 2 seed. They had to go through Baylor, who was a 3 seed, and then Florida, a 4 seed. But you know what? They were good this year. Florida was no pushover this year. But you know what? They defined the odds and just shocked some people and played phenomenal. And now here they are in the Final Four, their first ever Final Four appearance. And it should be interesting to see how it all plays out, because they will be in the first game at 6 p.m. Saturday against Gonzaga, followed by the second game with Oregon and North Carolina. Now, probably the best game of the entire weekend of the Elite Eight, which was North Carolina and Kentucky. The Tar Heels pulled away at the end, defeating the Wildcats 75-73 in an absolute classic. You know, Kentucky had a valiant effort by Malik Monk and De'Aaron Fox, scoring 12 and 13 points respectively. Monk had the game-tying 3 with 7.2 seconds late in the second half, though, and people thought that, hey, Kentucky He's probably going to pull away. North Carolina choked down the stretch, but with the help of Justin Jackson, who scored 19 points, followed by Luke May at 17, Tar Heels prevailed on Luke May's game-winning shot with 0.3 of a second. And the Tar Heels are playing in their 20th Final Four in school history. And I'm going to tell you this, folks, and you may not believe me, but despite Kentucky tying the game with 7 seconds or 7.2 seconds in the second half, I'm thinking North Carolina's going to win. Honestly, I really thought they were going to win. I said that to myself. I'm like, as soon as that happened, I'm like, too much time. North Carolina is going to win. I just had that feeling, and sure enough, it happened. Luke May hits the game-winning shot, and the rest, is history. And this year's Final Four. Talk a little about the Final Four, but this year's Final Four, though, it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be a bit unusual in terms of seeing teams that we don't really expect to see, or programs we don't really expect to do well in basketball or go this far in the tournament. I mean, North Carolina is one of the most prestigious college basketball programs in the country, but you take them out of the equation, you're pretty much seeing teams play in the Final Four for the first time. Gonzaga, South Carolina, and Oregon. Those teams are playing pretty much in their first Final Four. So you kind of have like a David Goliath kind of thing, with those three teams, and then you have North Carolina. But with that being said, though, the first game on Saturday, you're going to have Gonzaga versus South Carolina. That can go either way. South Carolina's game-tested. They're poised. They beat potent teams in their respective bracket region. Gonzaga's a 1 seed, though. They've been tearing it all this year. And, they exceeded expectations because people thought that if this Gonzaga team didn't even get to the Final Four, that this was going to be another disaster. Because Gonzaga has a history, a reputation of, they have good teams in the regular season, but then come tournament time, they don't come through when it matters the most. Sure, they got to the Sweet 16, and then I think an Elite 8 appearance here and there, but they've never gotten to the Final Four prior to this year. So I guess you can say this has been a stepping stone for them. This has been an accomplishment, but you know what? They're 2 wins away from being national champions, and we'll see what happens when they go up against the 7th-seeded South Carolina Gamecocks. And that should be an interesting game from the aspect of, or the perspective of, both these teams never even played in a national title game for college basketball. So the winner of this game will play in there first. Now, moving on to the later game, when you're going to have Oregon versus North Carolina, and then that's, honestly, I'm going to have my eyes glued to the TV on Saturday night for that game, because I want to see Oregon's defense go up against North Carolina's offense. I want to see North Carolina's post game with Justin Jackson and Luke May against that defense, because you saw in the Kansas game, Oregon was just lights out, giving Kansas no easy opportunities, closing the lanes, not giving them any, Kansas wasn't able to drive, kick out, and shoot. They played contested defense, and I want to see if Oregon can do the same thing against a more potent offense in North Carolina. And I think, and if you look at the possible championship matchups, what matchup could possibly be the worst, if you think about it? Gonzaga and Oregon? Not really, because those two play in the Pacific Northwest. Gonzaga is in Spokane, Washington. Oregon is in Eugene, Oregon. So that would be a little competition in that region. Or you can have North Carolina versus South Carolina. the Battle of the Carolinas, basically. Or you can have a 1 seed, or 1 seed, or 2 1 seeds playing each other with North Carolina Gonzaga, or Oregon and South Carolina. And South Carolina has kind of been the Cinderella team so far because they are a 7th seed, and they have been battle tested. But I think, looking at these teams, I think that North Carolina is going to pull through. Because you know what? They have an experienced coach in Roy Williams, who's coached in championship games and Final Fours, and he has 2 national championships on his resume. And just also, when you watch this North Carolina team, they just have that chip on their shoulder. They wanted to avenge last year's title game defeat when they lost to Villanova in crushing, heartbreaking fashion at the buzzer when Chris Jenkins hit the game-winning 3 when time expired. And you saw all the players, you saw the distraught looks on their face as they were walking off the court and the confetti was falling down on them. They wanted to avenge that. And North Carolina, they did that. They're kind of in a similar position. Roy Williams was in a similar position a while back, because if you recall, in 2008, they played Kansas in the Final Four. That was the year when all 4 1 seeds made it to the Final Four. But when they played Kansas that year in the Final Four in San Antonio, they got obliterated and were just embarrassed, and left a sour taste in their mouth, and they just couldn't believe it. And then the next year they won the championship against Michigan State, and they pretty much steamrolled through the whole tournament. And those guys, like, that was the year, or that was during the time with like Ty Lawson, Tyler Hansborough, Wayne Ellington, and what's his name? Tyler Zeller, I believe. Tyler Zeller, Harrison Barnes, yeah. That was, those guys took that to heart, that loss. And I think this team is going through the same thing from last year as well. Because they made it to the Final Four last year, lost in the championship game in heartbreaking fashion. Now this year they're in the Final Four, and you figure they have the edge. It's not going to be easy, because Oregon's no pushover. And certainly neither is Gonzaga or South Carolina, because, they made it to the Final Four. They're the last 4 teams, or other than North Carolina, the other 3 teams are the last 3 teams standing. But you figure, it's in the cards for North Carolina. They seem like they're going to win. I'm not going to make any guarantees, but it just seems like they have the more experienced coach, they have the more veteran team, and they're just trying to avoid losing back-to-back national championships. Because obviously they have to get through Oregon. That's not going to be easy, but they just want to avenge last year's defeat. And I think they will. Based on the resume of Roy Williams and what kind of program North Carolina has. Not just for this year, but in general. But we'll see what happens on Saturday night, and we'll preview the championship game next Monday along with opening day. And that concludes this segment.